There's a civil war on the right. Socialists are seizing power on the left.
I worry JD has been seduced by socialism. I'm not sure she can beat AOC.
She is a talented politician.
She's a fascist.
It does feel like our secular age is coming to an end.
We are starting from scratch. Faith is gone. Even the people who go to church every week don't really believe.
People want so badly for it to be over.
It can end with war. It can end with collapse.
Is everything still tickety-boo? Are you still an optimist? I left the Daily Wire 18 months ago, and when I did, I also left behind Jeremy's Razors, the company that bears my name. But now it's mine again, because while my circumstances have changed, my mission hasn't. Jeremy's Razors is about saying no to cancellation and decline. It's about a belief that real men have a responsibility to say enough, to stop complaining, and to build the future we want. We're building a company that does just that. We're building a company for us, not for them. We're building a company with our values, not theirs. I bought Jeremy's Razors back because I still believe we deserve to have great products from companies that don't hate us. If you believe the same, then I hope you'll buy Jeremy's Razors too. Andrew Klavan, thanks for being on the show.
It's great to be here. It's good to see you.
A lot's happened since the last time we were together. You know, there's a civil war on the right.
Yep.
The socialists are seizing power on the left. AOC is somehow actually in a position where she could become the next president.
As I've been warning for years.
Of the United States.
Yep.
Is everything still tickety-boo? Are you still an optimist?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've seen periods like this before. There's a period of change. My generation is dying, and our generation has dominated the consciousness of the country for 60 years, you know, and when we kind of traded up to Obama to see if the next generation could handle it. They couldn't. So they brought back the old guys again, you know. And I've compared it to whitewater. I used to do some rafting, you know, and some real whitewater rafting. And you hit whitewater and you're paddling like crazy and you think you have some power, but really it's just the current is going to take you down. You try to avoid the rocks. And I'm not saying that that's not a dangerous time. The 30s were a time like that and ended up with a world war. It can end with war. It can end with collapse. All kinds of bad things can happen. But I see lots of signs that we're going to make it, because I believe that there's a core problem that we have hit, that we have gone through a period of time, 400 years, you know, when the faith of our fathers was fading away for perfectly reasonable reasons. It wasn't like, you know, bad guys robbing our faith away. It was a new scientific outlook that seemed to contradict the biblical outlook. And so it was kind of natural that we sort of slipped away from the faith. It was almost fated to happen. And I think we've reached the limit of that. And I think almost all our problems, our worst problems, are connected to that. And I think I'm starting to hear people of intellect say, you know what, this doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, the rationale links don't fit together, even scientists, you know. And so I see that the possibility of coming into a better time. It'll be a time of trouble and pain and all this stuff, but look at the incredible stuff that's right on the horizon. Trips to Mars, maybe the colonization of Mars or the moon, which would, as Elon Musk has rightly said, preserve the only consciousness that we know in the world. AI, I can see incredibly great practical uses of it as from medicines, and, you know, taking all the side effects of other medicines and saying, well, those are side effects there, but they might help this disease here, things that we just don't have the capacity to do. Yesterday, for the first time, I rode in a driverless car, a Waymo. It was like being in Blade Runner. It was just like so science fiction-y, especially because I was with my son Spencer, who's a linguist, and his phone was set on Japanese. So the car was talking to us in Japanese. I thought, I'm actually in Blade Runner. You know, it's like I'm in Tokyo in the future. So yeah, I mean, look, there's always danger, there's always trouble, and there's always catastrophes. And, you know, we hope those are not what we're looking for. But right now, the rise of the socialists and the rise of the radicals on the right, I call them the right-wing surrender monkeys, because I think they're giving up on freedom, basically.
Yeah.
But those are things that happen in these moments, because it's kind of like, when you go through middle age, you go through a midlife crisis, all of a sudden, nothing makes sense. And you start to think, well, maybe I should become a fighter pilot. You start to do these crazy things, and there's no reason to think we can't get through this. The country is still pretty sound. A lot of good things have happened that we ignore. We go right on to the problems, the next problem, and we don't think about the fact that we've actually solved a lot of things that were troubling. And so I think bad things can always happen. Optimism is always the right thing. And bad things eventually will happen. Eventually the country will collapse, like everything else made by mortal man, right? But optimism is always the right thing because it makes you think, like, what am I supposed to do next? How do I solve this? So right now my feeling is danger waters, white water, but no reason we can't get through it.
Yeah. You talk about this sort of 400-year journey that we've been on, the death of the faith of our fathers.
Right.
And in part that obviously coincides with the scientific age and the rise of rational materialism, naturalism. It does feel like our secular age is coming to an end. And you can feel sort of spiritual forces, if you're attuned to these sorts of things, you can sort of feel spiritual forces on the move in the world in ways that maybe have been more obscured throughout our lifetime. And you do hear voices, I agree, you hear voices starting to identify the problem of this, even unlikely voices. You hear, famous atheists saying that their morality is derived from Christian culture, which is a concession that they would have been loath to have made even a decade ago, when all of us would tell them things like, well, even your morality is derived from Christian culture.
Yeah.
So no, how dare you? And yet, ultimately, faith is not a rational conclusion. People rarely reason their way to faith. Not never, rarely reason their way to faith. And people almost never come to faith, to true faith, through force.
Of course. Yeah.
One of the things that sort of marks Christianity as unique is that it isn't actually a religion that spreads primarily by force. Not to say that there haven't been attempts at that throughout history, but it's a fundamentally evangelical religion that reaches people at the level of the heart. How can you have, I'll phrase it differently. You see a lot of young people sort of being drawn to the faith in a way that maybe we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And yet it seems to be a very political expression of the faith that they're being drawn to that doesn't carry with it the sort of Christian character that I think actually made the country possible. Like my argument would be the institutional church matters, but it isn't the institution of the church that made the West possible. It's the character of the Christian that made the West possible. How do we answer that missing piece in people's journey to try to find their way back to faith right now?
So I want to answer two things in this. The first, that people don't come to faith through rationality necessarily, obviously true. But I was at a junket, basically overseas, and it was mostly scientists talking about how science is now pointing toward faith as opposed to away from faith, and the way that's happening. And each night we sat at different tables. And one night, as sort of a joke, because I was friendly with the guy who arranged the thing, without telling me, he sat me at an entire table of Jews, converted Jews. And he didn't tell me, and I didn't know, so we were just talking. And of course, it was like a movie I remember called Seconds, where a guy is given a new life, and new face and all this, and suddenly he realizes that everybody around him is a second. That's how it reminded me of. But anyway, I'm sitting there, and we started talking about our conversion experiences. And not one of us had come through any kind of the Spirit hit me. We all had reasoned our way to the point where the question of faith was a question of having faith in our reason. In other words, you can't see God, nobody sees God, but you had reasoned, oh yes, I sort of see that reason insists that he's there. And that's a very Jewish thing, Jewish way to become a Christian. And so it can be done. And I've been predicting for many years, since even before the Daily Wire, that a new kind of revival is coming. It's not that it hasn't happened before, it has, but it's a revival that comes down from the top. It's not going to be street preachers. It may end up with street preachers. It's not going to start like that. It's not going to start with people filing into the Catholic Church. I actually think those stories are overrated. It's going to start with guys in universities, and it's happening already, saying, you know what? I can't put this together. One of my favorite writers now is a guy named Ian McGilchrist, and he's a polymath. His books are thousands of pages long. They're all about the brain and nature, and he's a scientist and a psychiatrist, and he's all these different things. And I read his magnum opus, and it's 1,200 pages, I think, and every page is great. Like, I mean, I as a writer, I always just want someone to pick me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, pick my book up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, he's not alone. That's what you want as a writer. And that's what it was. It was like every page, I just loved it. Around page 800, I start to think, oh wait, he's sort of suggesting in this diffident way that all of this might have to do with God, So I interviewed him. I had him on my show, and I interviewed him. And he said, well, I'm a Christian. So I was like, Ian, and nobody respects this guy more than me. I mean, he's like, he's so brilliant. He's such a. I said, well, why didn't you say so? And he said, well, you have to meet people where they are. Mm. And when I questioned him, he was diffident about it. Like he wasn't like Jordan Peterson, who wants it to be some kind of mythic psychological, metaphor. He believes, but it's complex, and it's not, evangelical. It's not fundamentalist. It's a complex. He's a complex man. He has a complex system of belief. That is going to change everything. If people like that, and I think they will, and I've heard him talking to other people of the same caliber of intellect, if people like that start to say, look, I know more about nature than you do, and about science than you do, and he does. He knows more about it than anybody. And I'm telling you that there is that consciousness comes before matter, which is really the issue. And once that starts, it's like permission for the sophisticated to start to talk about God. And the reason I say this has happened before is that it happened in what was called the Oxford movement at the end of the Romantic era. And the Romantic era was this revolutionary era. It's when the French Revolution happened and all this. And, Cardinal Newman, who ultimately became a Catholic, but the first thing he started to say was like, no, wait, conservative Orthodox Christianity is true. And for 100 years, God came back into the life of the English people, and he came in from above. And then it just became clear that this was part of life. And things that they argued about, we think about the Victorian era, which is what followed the Romantic era. We think about it as, sexually repressed, which it was, and people dressing funny and all this stuff. But it was also a time of science, explosion of science, an explosion of liberalization in the good sense of that word, like the vote going to people who weren't necessarily lords and ladies and all this. And it was because people were thinking both in scientific terms and in God terms at the same time, which is what I think you have to do. And so I really do believe that, like, it's going to be the logic of it and the science of it that is going to rescue us, because there is God. There is a God, and he's very strangely like the God of the Bible. There's a very solid resemblance to the God of the Bible. And because that is the essential fact about reality, when you don't believe in it, you're insane, right? I mean, to be deluded about the central.
You don't believe in fundamental reality.
Right. And so as we look around our country and we see people saying men can become women, and, we're going to abolish the police, and we're going to get rid of jails. And then you say to them, well, where are we going to put the criminals? They say, well, let's not get specific because it'll move on, or as AOC said the other day, well, woke 1 was crazy. We're moving on to woke 2, it's mental illness.
The revenge.
Yeah. It's, and there's a wonderful book that I found through Ian McGilchrist about modernist art and the resemblance it bears to schizophrenia. And I heard that, and it's by a, brilliant psychiatrist. I heard that, and I thought, of course it does, because we've been crazy. We've been living as if there's no, like just you can't see gravity, so there is no gravity. And I think I'll walk off this building, and that's kind of what we've been doing. And so as that starts to occur to people like McGilchrist and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and even, Richard Dawkins is now saying, he's a cultural Christian. I think it opens up the way. intellect and ideas trickle down kind of like money. And I think that is going to, that's the thing I'm hoping for and looking for. While other people are saying, well, attendance at church is up or it's down, I don't think that's going to be how it works. I think it's going to be a sort of permission that we get from the people who think best. And I think that's how it's going to play out if it plays out the way I hope it does.
I want to defend Jordan Peterson briefly. You say that he wants the whole thing to be sort of mythical, and I probably see Jordan slightly differently because I think that Jordan actually wants it to be true.
Yes.
He's afraid that it's only mythical.
Yeah.
and one of the places where I have a lot of respect for Jordan is I think that his actual challenge with it is a kind of honesty.
No question.
He does not want to say that a thing is true if he doesn't actually believe that it's true. He doesn't want the fact that he hopes that it's true to be enough. And in that way, I think he misses faith, because faith isn't the things that we know, it's the things that we hope.
First of all, I take no second to nobody in my respect for Jordan, both as a thinker and also as a lovely person. He's just a wonderful, gracious.
Well, and he represents Christian character, which is a thing that's missing in a lot of people who do say with certainty that it's true.
That's absolutely true. But he is in a Jungian cul-de-sac. He's a Jungian. And Jung famously said, and correctly said, it's impossible to know whether God is real or simply the sum total of our interchange with outward reality. That's not a quote. That's basically his idea. There's no out of that cul-de-sac, and I think he's stuck in it. And I think that he's afraid to let go because his intellect is the way he has made it through the world, and he's afraid to let go of his intellect for a moment to say, all right, it's one or the other. I'm plunking for this because it ultimately makes more sense. So I don't know. I told him once that I used to kid him all the time. I'd interview him or talk to him, and I'd ask him about his belief in God. And I told him I was starting to feel like the bad guy in a Western who shoots at the feet of a guy to make him dance, So I said, I'm just not going to ask you about it anymore, But I agree with you. I think it's honesty. I personally believe that God prefers an honest non-believer to a fake believer, and I think that most...
There was a great play back in the traveling tent show days, I believe, Saintly Hypocrites and Honest Sinners.
Yeah. I think most saints have had their doubts and
of course,
moment. Yeah, and that's honesty.
But this is, if we were to say that part of it is that Jordan's intellect is an impediment in some ways to faith, while on the other hand saying intellect is what's going to lead this sort of revival of faith. That probably does speak to the fact that the path that you're suggesting does come with innate limitations, that a lot of the people at that sort of elite intellectual level, who, even the ones who are drawn to this, even the ones who contemplate it and wrestle with it, do have to get over the hurdle of the unknowable.
Yeah.
God ultimately cannot be known through intellect, I guess is my ultimate. I shouldn't say he can't be discovered intellectually, because he can be, but he can't ultimately be known only intellectually.
That's right. Yeah.
And intellectual Christians have done their own share of damage throughout the history of the church, because when Christianity becomes only a way of thinking or a way of processing the world, it can quickly become separated from Christ, and it can quickly become separated from Christian character.
Yep.
And it can actually, the horrible thing, I mean, it probably goes without saying that the worst things are the things done in the name of, the evil things done in the name of God.
Of course, yeah.
And when...
But that's evidence that there's a God, right?
But it does evidence that there's a God,
Yeah.
That's right. That you can do a lot of damage by trying to make Christianity into a system, as opposed to making Christianity substantially reality. There's some people will say it's a system on one hand and a relationship on the other. And I think it's easy to mock that kind of idea because it feels very American and very evangelical. But ultimately, it is a relationship that we have with God, which is not a superficial relationship. It's our relationship to everything is expressed in our relationship toward God. I mean, I think the theological view of it would be, Christ in you. If Christ is in you, then all the good that you do is the fruit of the Spirit. Any good in you isn't of you, and you start to feel this sort of way in which you, to use the scripture, there are these ways in which you are in the world and not of the world, and you perceive that more and more and more as you understand your relationship
Yeah.
with God, and in that way, you start to. Uh, what begins as feeling like you're separating from reality, you ultimately start to feel that no, it's that you're becoming ever more real. That reality is actually the thing that the supernatural actually is the natural in a way, and the natural is the imaginary. It's the constructs that we've built in our mind.
What you just said is key, that the supernatural and the natural are one,
Mhm.
and that's why sometimes, I listen to people talk about demons and angels and all that, in which I believe, I actually think that's a real thing. But I think that, you can actually get there through reality, because reality will behave in a supernatural way if you watch it closely enough. And nature is supernatural. And it's just like,
The most natural, isn't that really what?
yes, and it's just, it is a remarkable thing, and it's one of the things about getting older is really strange, is the world becomes a very alien place. You
Mm.
start to look at it and think like, oh, it's totally mysterious. It's like a complete mystery. Everything is a mystery. You think like, oh, I'm sitting in a chair. You think, wait, I'm sitting in a chair. What does that mean? You can go all day, like
Oh
that,
yeah.
because you're starting to, leave, and you're starting to separate, and you start to see it in a much more realistic way. Listen, during my conversion, I mean, I write crime stories. That's been my profession, and they're about gangsters and whores and all the things that people are, and a lot of dirty business in it and all this. And when I found out that I was a Christian, which came as a tremendous surprise to me, my first thought was, oh, please God, do not turn me into a Christian writer, because that would be, that would be the worst possible thing that could happen to me. And instead, and this was when I was about 5-month period when I was struggling with this realization. Instead, I found that it made me a much more realistic, much more hard-boiled writer, because the facts of life go so much deeper than just what you see on the street. And I think that so much of what has been happening in our society as we've reached this apex of materialism has been an attempt to erase the invisible pain and the invisible tragedy of sin and of alienation from God. And almost every time, it's usually the left, they're practiced at it, that they change a word. It's to separate you from those realities. Like my favorite one these days is sex work. When AOC was once put out a tweet that said sex work is work, and I thought, that's the feeling when your congresswoman tells you the same thing as your pimp, and like
Yeah.
what's so awful about that is you think like, and I've done a lot of research into prostitution for my books and talked to prostitutes and all this stuff. And the thing is, work is something that you do for to help other people that you get rewarded for, because you're doing something useful. So if you clean toilets in a train station, you are doing noble, honorable work. And I know it's not the most glamorous work in the world. It's the opposite of that. But, we understand that it's better to have a clean bathroom. But prostitution is paid rape. It's paying to rape somebody and then saying, you can't call it rape because you took my money. So it's like there's an ancient myth about a woman who's raped and they cut out her tongue. That's what prostitution is. And prostitution is only work if what men do to prostitutes is legitimate. And it's clearly not. It's clearly a deep, deep crime and a sin. And so you're taking away the tragedy. I mean, if you talk to prostitutes, they're all detached from their body. They're all detached from their lives. They're full of hatred and anger and disgrace and disgust. They don't know it all the time, but it's very obvious to see. So many of them, even in places where prostitution is legal, like Nevada, they have pimps anyway who beat them up and take their money. And they don't need pimps, but they have them anyway because it's part of the complex of degradation. So almost every time they change a word, it is to detach us from the responsibilities we have to the invisible,
Yeah.
and they think because those things are invisible, they're not there. And if you change the word, the reality will change. And that's insane. That's an insane thing to think, but they don't believe in the central fact about reality. So they are literally insane.
Yeah, we have been looking at the world for decades and even centuries now. It's sort of like the scene in The Three Amigos, where they're supposed to go find the singing bush,
Yeah.
and Chevy Chase, they find a bush and it's singing, and Chevy Chase keeps saying, "Are you the singing bush? Are you the singing?" I think we're going to have to assume that this is the singing bush. They can't. We're staring at the singing bush, and we can't call it what it is. We can't accept the reality
Right.
of what it is. We see mental illness. I've observed before. You never meet a schizophrenic. You never meet a. I've lost the word.
Schizophrenic?
Not a schizophrenic. The people who shout profanities.
Oh, yeah, yes. The, what is it called? No, I've lost it too. Yeah, but go ahead. I get it. Yeah.
You never meet one who goes, "Rainbows, rainbows, my
Yeah,
mother's
no,
love."
no.
Tourette's. You never meet someone with Tourette's
Right.
who shouts about their mother's love. Because things don't, when something is broken, it doesn't behave better.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we can observe that mental illness leads to bad thoughts, to bad expressions. But we can't say that there's anything spiritual involved in it. We don't want there to be the spiritual to be real, because we're afraid that that's blaming a person who's obviously in distress.
Yeah.
But I don't know that one has to say that the person with Tourette's is to blame for their Tourette's in order to say that there's something spiritual that's also taking place, not only something physical and material, because there isn't ultimately a distinction between the physical and material and the spiritual. We're embodied souls.
Right.
So the person who's set mental illness aside because of all of I know what all the objections are going to be. People will be offended that I've even said as much as I've said so far, because it seems like it lacks compassion. I have nothing but compassion for a person struggling with something like that, and I don't blame them in every instance. Certainly, there are children who have this sort of disorder. Of course, that's not
Right.
some particular fault of their own, but it is a fault of a particular world, and the particular world is one in which what's broken physically is broken because of a thing that's broken spiritually, because of the presence of sin in the world, because of the presence of the fall. So we know when you see a person who has a physical illness, that it very rarely causes them to have more joy, very rarely causes them to have more hope. Not never. God does very mysterious things in the world. But for the most part, when something breaks physically, we can see that it leads to depression. And I think, I've had this argument with our friend Michael Knowles before, because the Catholic Church takes the view that it takes of suicide. And I agree with the Catholic Church in its view of suicide, except at the most extreme end of it, which is I can easily imagine a kind of suffering from which my compassion for someone in that situation overwhelms my sense of the horror of the evil itself. That as with everything in life, there are these horrible trade-offs that happen. I think this is part of the problem in our politics too. We don't want to acknowledge the horrible trade-offs of reality.
Yeah.
But it's easy to imagine that if someone every day had a torturer come in and drill another hole somewhere in their body, if that person eventually took their own life, you would have deep compassion for them.
Right, of course.
Because you understand that what's happening to them materially isn't only happening to them materially. It's ultimately breaking down that other part of them. But I just think that door swings both ways. I think that things that start in the spiritual can manifest in the physical,
Of course.
just as things that start in the physical can manifest
Well, right.
in the spiritual.
And the problem that I have with Christian evangelism, let's call it, the outreach that Christians do right now. One of my serious concerns right now is that nobody's speaking up for Christ. Nobody. Even the people who are trying to speak up for Christ are doing it in the worst possible way. And one of the first things you start to understand is if there is an objective moral order which requires God, and I believe that there is a God and there is an objective moral order, our relationship to that is sort of like the relationship of a word to a meaning. When I say the word love, there is no way that word can contain what love is. It can absolutely no way. And so sort of, I say it in a context. I say it to my wife, it means one thing. I say it to my friend, it means another thing. I say there's a context, and that context fills in.
It lets us reach kind of into the shadows and feel the general shape of a thing.
That's right. And so that's the way it is with our moral order. There are questions we can't answer. There are things that I believe, for instance, that like euthanasia is occasionally justified. I think it should be illegal. I think it should be done. The wisest thing that John McCain ever said was, he said, we should never torture people. And they said, well, what would you do in a situation where it would save American lives? He said, I would do what had to be done. And I thought, of course, that's right. And we get very unsatisfied with that. And people want, that fist pumping certainty. We don't have that. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand what original sin is. You don't understand what sin is, really. You don't understand what our separation is from God and what it is we're trying to accomplish. And so many people who talk about religion, first of all, for so many people, it seems to me, and I don't mean to just condemn people in bulk, but for so many people, it seems to me.
But you'll do what must be done.
I'll do what has to be done. Damn it. That Christianity is just an excuse to blame other people for things. It's like people are always talking to me about gay people, and I think, I've never had a problem with gays. I've never had a problem with a desire. I've never had a desire for a man that I had to fight off. The day I have that desire, I'll worry about that sin. And it's but really, when you read St. Paul, he's talking mostly to the churches, and so when he says, "Don't do this, don't do that," he's talking to people in a state of belief, in a state of faith. When he goes to Corinth and he's not talking to people in a state of faith, he's talking totally differently. He starts to say, here's why I think there's a God, and here's why I think you already believe in him, which is a great argument, by the way. And so we're starting, people do not understand that we are starting from scratch. Faith is gone. Even the people who believe often don't believe, Even the people who go to church every week don't really believe and have a relationship with God. And so our arguments have to start from there. And that, I think, was what Ian McGilchrist was saying, that, once you get to page 800, you'll be ready for this idea. I don't think we have to be that diffident, and I'm incapable of that kind of patience anyway, But I do think we have to talk to people as if they have in a reasonable state of unbelief, and say, here's why I think you might be wrong, and ask them to test it too. I mean, my big thing, so much of my journey to God happened in prayer. Yeah. My journey from theism to Christ happened in prayer. And I find prayer an amazing, I pray every day. I pray for quite a long period of time. And I find it an amazing thing. I always kid people, give God a call. His lines are open, It's like there really is an interchange over time. And it has nothing to do with, I see the light and now I'm free of alcohol. And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with every day become something different and better,
I love this idea that words can't contain meanings. I've thought a similar thought many times in relation to God himself, that all of the ways that God reveals himself to us can't contain him.
Of course.
Right. So God says, I'm the Father, but nothing about Father can contain God. Right. Your Father was great or horrible. Either way, he doesn't contain God. He was flawed, and you have opinions about him that don't apply. Or, the picture of marriage is the picture between God's relationship with his church by way of Christ. But of course, no marriage actually represents the way that God relates to man in Christ, right? It's just like this way that the unknowable is giving you just the slightest glimpses into
right. That's right.
The slightest hooks on which you might be able to come to know him at all.
Right.
With your little, as our friend Bill Whittle would say, your little cantaloupe-sized brain. And God has a brain at least the size of a blue whale. So it's going to be very difficult to relate to. I thought there was another really interesting aspect of this, though, which is when we're talking to people as though they're in a state of unbelief, when we're talking to people to advance Christ, who you say is the word that's unspeakable in our culture, I think you said recently on a show, is God.
Yes. Yeah.
That Christ is the thing missing. That God is missing from our view of the world, and therefore we miss reality. Christ is missing from our lips, and therefore we're missing the opportunity to even orient ourselves toward that reality. Talk to every person in some way as though they're in a state of unbelief, so that you can help point them toward the divine thing. We're doing this. This is a competition. And it's not just a competition against secular atheism anymore. In this moment, it's a competition against political Christianity. Against, it's one thing to say, on one hand, you would say, have Christ on your lips. On the other hand, you've taken issue with people saying Christ is king as a sort of political slogan,
Yeah.
as many people are currently saying it. And to be clear, you've never had a problem with people saying Christ
Right.
is king.
No,
That's
of
a
course.
false,
Yeah.
completely false accusation.
Right.
The loudest voices championing Christ currently online seem to be those who are putting forth a political ideology, not a theology. And so when you're competing with a broken political machinery to try to reach people at the level of their soul, how do you distinguish your message from theirs?
Well, I mean, for one thing, my message is different, very different from theirs, and it doesn't involve like my Christianity doesn't require you to hate anybody, which is and there
Sure.
are there people I hate? Sure, but that's.
We're talking about Christianity. Slander widows, falsely accuse the innocent, hate the Jews. That's Christianity.
That's Christianity.
Have you even internet, bro? I don't know if you even internet, bro.
No, I mean, I think it is a different message, and I think a lot of Christianity is preached silently by your behavior and by your treatment of people, and I think that you're pointing to something that is always going to be true. There are always going to be bad people in the world, and bad people do bad things, and sometimes they win. They may not win forever, but sometimes they win for the period of time that might be your lifetime. And it can be a disaster. One of my real problems with the right, the talkosphere on the right, whatever you want to call it, and the reason I bring this up is because I think our hope is on the right. I think the left has gone, this is kind of they are the bulwark of bad ideas at this point, Conservatives, I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal. I was born a liberal. My heart is liberal, and I find that in conservatism. I find that's where liberalism lives. It does not live on the left. It's the most small-minded, pinch-hearted philosophy I've seen in America in my lifetime is leftism. But people who are natural conservatives are often that way because they can see how fragile things are. They can see you pull this string and the whole suit comes apart. You allow no fault divorce. It leads to gay marriage. It means marriage falls apart. And they can see that, and they're not wrong. Life is fragile. Society is fragile. Rome was just as great a society as ours, and now it's vanished. The Twin Towers were magnificent buildings. They're gone in a day. It's all true. But that attitude includes a lot of people who have what a psychologist would call like anxiety disorders, And an anxiety disorder is not that you worry a lot, because people worry and sometimes you have to worry a lot. And sometimes, anxiety disorder is mistaking your worries for predictions. It's thinking, the one hypochondria, when I had my crack up in my youth, it came to me through hypochondria in part, is where you think like you could have cancer, you may have cancer, must have cancer, And so we look at these threats, we see people like Tucker and Candace, like stealing the idea of conservatism for something that has nothing to do with conservatism in any way whatsoever, and saying horrible, horrible things. And we think it's a threat, and it is a threat. It's bad. Bad people do bad things, and they can win. But it's not a prediction, or the fact that we see it there doesn't mean the disaster will come. That's catastrophizing, and there's a lot of that on the right because of the nature of the people who are led to conservatism. Includes a lot of people with this anxiety disorder, and it sells because fear always sells, and gloom and anger. They're sins, and so they sell. And my emphasis, I guess, is always, what are the good guys doing? Because I don't believe that good is the absence of evil. I believe evil is the absence of good. I believe good is first. Just like I believe consciousness becomes before matter, I believe that good comes before evil, and evil is just an emptiness, And so I want to know, what are the good people doing? Like, if you think, for instance, the people we think of as good, policemen, firemen, doctors, and all, they're all people who are fighting something evil, crime, fires, disease, right? But good is something else, It actually is the positive presence of love, and love is such an overused and stupid word, Abusive parents say they love their children, and people who cheat on their wives tell you they love their wives and all this stuff. So it's a word that can be very meaningless and empty, but it does have a meaning, and the meaning that it has in the Gospels is a very beautiful and rich meaning, which I think includes taking people as they are, taking people not where they are, but as they are. One of my experiences of life is one of the good things about, if we wanted to have a longer show, we could talk about all the bad things about me, but one of the good things about me is I've always taken people as they came. It's like, show me you're a treacherous, evil person, and I will treat you like a treacherous, evil person up until that moment. Shapiro gives me hell about this. Like, I like almost everybody I meet, and one of my weird experiences of that is there's a lot of people who don't like that, because they can see that I see who they are. They can see that I see the thing they're hiding from me, and I like them anyway. And that is very hard for them to bear, And yet that, I think, is a trait that connects me to Christianity. And I think that is what we should be thinking about. What are we doing for our country, our policy, our philosophy of politics that will express that? Which is why, you've been through a lot of it. Ben and I have had these huge arguments, and I love Ben, and Ben is a very bright guy and understands so much about politics and all this stuff. But no system saves us, because out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight was ever made. And I think that no system is going to make things great. So, just as an example, capitalism. I think that capitalism is the greatest economic system of all time, but it's only an economic system. And when you put that in front of, massive misery that it might cause if you have pure capitalism, I think you have to start to address the misery in some way. Now, it doesn't have to be, legal restrictions on businesses, but it has to be some kind of cultural, maybe some kind of cultural thing. But we have to think like that. Conservatives cannot get hypnotized by systems, because systems, if conservatism is going to be Christian conservatism, it has to realize that systems will not save you, only love will do that. And so, in a perfect world, there would be no welfare. It would all be personal charity. But I'm not but we don't live in a perfect world, and I'm not sure people can survive the insecurity of waiting for charity. Whereas, an entitlement, as corrupting as it is, and it is corrupting, it corrupts not just the giver, but the receiver. It's a totally corrupt system. We may need a little of it to keep people sane enough to keep the system in place. We need to talk with reason and compassion when we talk about conservatism, because I believe one of the reasons I've been a Donald Trump supporter, even though I like with everybody else, I see what Donald Trump is. I'm not at all confused about who he is or what he is. But I think he was a godsend to this country. I was out of this country for 7 years. I lived overseas, and I came back, and you know how when you're away from somebody, you see the changes. And I saw a culture that had been taken captive, and it was taken captive on both sides. I saw conservatives saying, well, this is compassionate conservatism. I thought, no, conservatism is the compassionate thing. It's the left that's not compassionate. I saw people, after Reagan, I saw Bush say, I want a kinder, gentler nation. I thought, how much kinder can you get than the world that Reagan gave us, the 25 years of bounty and peace that all came out of his management? I saw people apologizing for the good.
Yeah.
And they were so wrapped up and so gagged in their inner selves that only a bull in a china shop could break those chains, those mental chains. And it was only somebody who really didn't care whether he was a good person or not, who could break through a system where goodness was dishonesty, that they'd made a virtue of dishonesty.
Yeah, I sometimes say of Trump, because he's not a particularly moral figure, gave everyone permission to be their worst self.
Yeah.
And the thing that no one could have seen coming is that it turns out a lot of people are a lot worse than Trump.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So, Trump is not the bad thing. Many of the bad things that have been ushered in the Trump era, Trump himself is actually not guilty of. But he did sort of give permission for everyone to go find.
And that happened in the Reagan era too. But he also gave permission for people to speak the truth that they had been told was wrong to speak.
I agree.
And that to me, I was joking with probably my oldest friend. We were like small town reporters together, and he was like the first real conservative I ever knew. And I wrote him recently. I said, I've never been a really political person. I'm an artist. I'm a cultural person. And I said, I opened my big mouth and destroyed my Hollywood career. And I did it because I saw that our culture had been taken over by villains on the left. And I said, now we won that fight, and the culture has been taken over by villains on every side. I said, my work here is done.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I see. What I see is like, yes, we broke, and you played a major role in that, by the way. But as major a role as you played, it would not have happened without Trump in the lead, because he's such a bull. And we did. We won. When the night he was elected, the second time, I said, we beat him. They did everything they could to stop him. And in the world that I came back to after I returned from England, he'd have been destroyed. Because there would have been nobody saying, oh, look, there have been no Elon Musk keeping X alive. There have been no Daily Wire. There have been no people saying, no, here in real time, I'm showing you the video that shows you this guy lied. And it can be on ABC, NBC, and CBS, and the New York Times, and the Washington Post, but they're wrong, and we beat them, and that was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now we have to start to build the new thing. And that requires us to think about what, yes, should we call out the Tuckers and the guys on putts, I mean, it's like, and the Candaces and all this stuff. But what are we supposed to be doing? And I think that's really important. I mean, ever since that night, I've been sort of thinking, what do I say now? And it's dangerous because people are get angry, and they the minute you don't say the thing, people have like slots in their head, yes and no. And the minute you don't say the thing they think is yes, they hear no.
Right.
So if you say people are using Christ as king in an answer,
you're saying we can't say Christ as king.
Exactly. That's that is the world you're living with. But we can deal with that. People can be reasoned with, and they can hear the truth when it hits them. And so that's I guess what I'm thinking about all the time is what am I supposed to do today? What am I supposed to say today? And how will it? And I say this in a completely unreligious way. I mean, you may be the only person who understands the next thing I say. I say this in a completely unreligious way. How can I speak Christ into the world? And I do not mean how can I speak Christianity into the world. I mean, how can I speak that thing that takes people as they are and loves them? And I think it's complicated. It's a hard thing to do, to turn that into policy.
One of the challenges of our moment, from my point of view, is how much people don't want to hear that it isn't over. I went on a series of British talk shows because the Pendragon cycle is doing very well in the UK right now. And I've had the same event happen, or the same statement be said to me twice now on two of these shows, which is, no one ever comes on and says anything positive. Why is your message so hopeful? We've never gotten to end an episode on optimism before. Thank you. Because, and all I'm saying,
it's so British, by the way.
People want so badly for it to be over. They want so badly for this to be the end. They want so badly for someone to come and rescue us, because that doesn't require us to do the rescuing. It doesn't require anything of us except anger, and anger is a kind of catharsis. And hopelessness is a strangely hopeful thing.
It takes the suspense away.
It takes the suspense away.
Is painful.
Yeah. Would that we were slaves again in Egypt.
Yes. Yeah.
You say that the word that's missing in public life is Christ, and of course that's true, or is God, and of course that's true, but it's also freedom. When's the last time you heard anyone in high office or in the commentariat use the term freedom or liberty?
Yeah, no, it's why I talk about it every show. Every time I do my show, I talk about it.
Yeah. My senior producer, Joel Berry, put out a tweet a week ago that said that his wife had made burritos for a family of 8 for $20. There was no instruction to any other person. There was no criticism of any other person. It got 12 million views, and the vice president himself weighed into the controversy in a very low way, by the way. I thought it was beneath him. Because it made people so angry, just the implicit suggestion that you can do something about your circumstance. It wasn't, again, if you go read his tweet, it wasn't even critical.
Yeah.
But it was a rebuke. And it was a rebuke of people's acceptance that they have no agency. They don't want agency. And in part, I think this is because even as difficult as things are right now, the economic sort of uncertainty that's been rife throughout really my adult life. I mean, if you think I came into adulthood, 9/11 happens, 2008 brings the financial crisis, 2020 brings the shutting down of the world, the seminal political event of, I think, any of our lifetimes. It'll be with us for a century.
Yep.
The rampant inflation of the Biden era and Trump printing all that money in 2020. I mean, we can't say that was only Biden who created that inflation. The crazy economic uncertainty that accompanies the collapse of demographics. People don't have children, the importation of the third world into the West because, in many ways, as a result of the fact that no one's having children. That economic environment is incredibly unsettling and is incredibly difficult. And yet, no one's ever been richer.
Yep.
We're filthy rich. The poorest people in our country are richer than the middle class in Europe, and the poorest people in Europe are the richest people who've ever existed. And when you have this level of material prosperity, even at the lowest levels in society, people kind of get bored. When you live in a society that after the Second World War essentially defeated war, disease, poverty, and death, at least for a century, defeated war, disease, poverty, and death, or the better part of a century, you get a little bored. The true horrible thing hasn't happened since the Second World War. Bad things have happened. And if you're in certain places at certain times, I mean, if you're in Cambodia, terrible things happen. But in the West, the bottom just hasn't fallen out in a century.
Yeah.
And there is sin is a very peculiar phenomenon. There's a strange thing where we just sort of want it to get worse. We like to watch the zombie apocalypse movie and all kind of imagine like, I do kind of wish it would all burn down and then I could be Rick Grimes and I could walk around and be the man of action and I could finally be somebody and I could finally do something. We want the Constitution to be over because, kind of just because meh. And wouldn't it be great if we could be like, we feel that we're the lesser sons of greater fathers, and we think the only way that we could be the greater fathers is to face the things that they faced. And so we sort of I think we find ourselves in this. You and I had a disagreement a decade ago, and I told you that I worried that some of these things were on their way. And at that time you said they weren't, and you said, no, we're too rich in this country for those things to happen. And I said, I don't think that's right, Drew, because I think both things are true. We are too rich for those things to happen in a rational world, but ultimately people's perception of their reality is more compelling to them than reality.
Well, of course. Yes.
And in a way, that's how we find ourselves in this moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember that as talking about fascism. And I think that we were talking specifically about Germany. I hate this thing about Weimar America because I know a lot about Weimar America. This is not Weimar America in any way, shape, or form. Look.
I lived through Weimar.
Yeah, I was there. I am Weimar, actually. People don't know that.
Weimar von Klavan.
But the thing about it is, of course, evil things and good things never happen the same way twice. So bad things can happen. There's no question. Again, the anxiety disorder is not seeing that bad things could happen. It's thinking that the fact that you think they're going to happen means they're going to happen.
That's right. We are not Weimar Germany.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think we are.
Well, this is what I was going to say. Is we do have this weird, talking about the famous Burrito tweet. Is we have this fact that we're so well off and we have so much stuff. I came from a world with much less stuff. That even if we lose a little of our stuff, we feel hard done by. It's like that Louis C.K. routine about everything's fantastic and nobody's happy.
Yeah.
You're in a plane and your cell phone doesn't work, and you're like, what the, what's going on? It's like you're flying in the sky. So there is that level of being spoiled. And look, I remember back in the 90s, I think it was, there was a novelist, in my mind, overrated novelist named John Irving, who wrote The World According
that guy.
The World According to Garp was his big book. It's not a very good book, but people loved it. And he said, in some ways, I feel living in America that as a writer, I'm unimportant. I almost wish that I lived in the Soviet Union. And this must have been the 80s. It must have been before the Soviet Union fell. And I thought, well, I'd be happy to come over to your house and attach electrodes to your testicles. It's like you think that'll improve your life. And you're right. You're right. That's the yearning for heroism. And heroism requires great danger. And of course, the funny thing is, of course, we have heroes. We call them cops and soldiers, and they go out and they actually face great danger. You can do that if you want, but most of us don't want to do that, and we're not built for it. And so we're having this daydream about that, and there's no question that happens. But what I do think, I do think a couple of things play into this. One is our government does too much. Our government really is out of control and does way, way too many things. And so this idea of like healthcare is bad, fix it. My feeling is stop fixing it, go away. I bought a television once because I needed it so I could view movies because I was in the movie business, and it cost me $10,000 to set up a cinematic system. That system would now cost me $600.
Oh, yeah.
You know why? Because the government never said every man should have a TV set. We must solve the problem.
A man for every TV and a TV for every man.
Right. And so I always wonder, like, why wouldn't that work with healthcare? It's like, and I understand some problems, some differences, but I think that government does too much. And so the first thing, especially younger people, say is, I can't buy a house, do something. And so when Joel puts out a thing saying, maybe not go to, Burritos or Us and cook them at home, it's like, what do you mean? I've been going there, but, I remember the conversation I had with my daughter once where, she didn't have any money. And I said, how often do you go to Starbucks? Every day. And I buy one for me and one for my boyfriend. And I thought, so that's $10. I said, you can brew a cup of coffee for 20 cents. It's like, yeah. But that's, you got to learn that stuff, right?
That's right.
So I thought that burrito conversation was actually pretty interesting because our friend Matt Walsh was screaming that it's political suicide not to notice when people say they're in pain. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But it's long-term political suicide not to point out when people are spoiled, and reacting. And listen, Reagan, the first George Bush lost to Bill Clinton because there was a dip in the economy like this, and it was covered like it was the Great Depression because Reagan had been so successful in restoring the economy that this was like, oh my God, we're on breadlines.
Yeah, people were throwing themselves out of story buildings in Lower Manhattan.
Right, and so there's a little of that going on, but there also is this thing that the next thing has not yet come, and that is really difficult. Are we going to Mars? What is AI? These are real questions, and our press is so corrupt and so bad that all we hear is AI can dream. It's like go away. That's going to take every one of your jobs. It's funny. I was talking to Peter Thiel. And all these billionaires are the same. You ask them a question and they like stare at you. I don't know what that is. And he said, he said to me, we were sitting together, and he said, Mamdani was elected because people feel AI is going to take their jobs. So I said, well, Peter, you're from Silicon Valley, is it? And he stared at me. I just want to say, what? Just don't. But I just thought, like, say something, what is the answer?
Well, listen, my observation about these billionaires, that class of billionaires, the Silicon Valley billionaires, is they are the smartest people who've ever lived. And they know the least about people of any group of people who has ever lived.
Yes.
I think Elon Musk is the greatest living American. He is literally building the future, which is my mantra that we're at the end of something. It's our job to build the future.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You have agency, go do it.
Yeah.
But when Elon says things like, we're going to need a universal wage because no one's ever going to work again, you shouldn't be saving for retirement. It's foolish that you're saving for retirement because by the time you retire, we're going to have superabundance. And I want to go, whoa, hold the fort. Please save for retirement. Please don't give us a living wage. Please don't rob us of our dignity. And the machines are not going to replace us because God made the universe for man, not for machines. Like just a fundamental reality that the machine, whatever, you may lose your job to the machine, the forklift came along and the guys who used to carry the pallets lost their jobs. That's creative disruption. That's part of why we have forklifts now, because you have to have those kinds of moments of creative destruction. But people are not going to be replaced as a category by machines, because that's, to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, that is just a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. That's seeing reality as other than what it is. The far more likely thing is that this is going to be an incredibly disruptive technological moment that will front load a lot of negative consequences, and that over time will reveal a lot of unbelievable benefits that unlock new opportunities for human beings to thrive, which is always what happens in moments of great technological upheaval.
And it may happen faster than it's happened in the past, because things just happen faster.
Things accelerate. And it may be bad. Like the front-loaded negative consequences may be very negative indeed. I don't know. I'm not nearly as pessimistic about AI as many people are.
No,
I'm fairly bullish on it.
Yeah.
But in fairness, when we figured out how to split the atom, we smashed 2 cities before it occurred to us, we could also power cities with this exact same technology.
That is people, yeah.
So we may feel really horrible front-loaded negative consequences.
It's entirely possible. And this thing you were saying a minute ago about how these guys know nothing about people, I had a conversation, I think he was one of the higher-ups at Palantir, I think. I can't remember which of the AI places he was. And he had been sort of suggesting that the large language model proves that there's no meaning, that nothing has a meaning. It's all patterns.
It's all predictive.
Stuff. And I said to him, there's a song that I hate because it's a sentimental song, but it has one great line in it. That's song sung by Louis Armstrong. It's a Wonderful World. And it's just a gooey song, so I don't like it. But it has this one line in it where he says, I see friends shaking hands saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. And that always goes right through my heart. And I said, when a machine says, I love you, or I'm going to punch you in the face, it means nothing. It's telling you nothing. I said, if I say I'm going to punch you in the face, it may not mean I'm going to punch you in the face, but it means I'm angry at you. And inside me, I feel this anger, and there's something that has happened between us as a relationship. If a machine says it's going to punch you in the face, it doesn't mean anything.
My favorite thing about AI is that I had a very lengthy conversation with ChatGPT recently, in which it was explaining to me how to communicate an idea to another AI model. Chat was very good at a thing. Claude was very bad at the same thing, but Claude was better at the overall task. And so I was trying to ask Chat, how do I tell Claude to understand this insight that you have, that it's missing, so that it can do the part that it's better at than you, even better still? And I spent an hour on this program because we're using AI in my new company the way that people who opine about AI talk about AI, not the way the rest of us use it, where it's basically just smart Google. Like, we're doing some really amazing things. John Lewis on my team's doing who is the president of Daily Wire, is doing some truly groundbreaking, interesting things with AI. And so I went a long way down this path with Chat, and Chat concluded ultimately that we should write a 30,000 word book on, it called it The Boring Method. And it's on how Jeremy Boring thinks about the world. And that if we constructed this book and then fed that book into the Claude model, then Claude would be able to do this other task much better. And I said, well, that's could be an interesting exercise anyway, because the thing that Chat is very good at, it has a lot of insights into how I think. It's really remarkable at helping me see things. And so it said, here's how I would structure the book, and here's kind of an outline on it. And I spent about an hour, and we got all the way down this path. It even wrote like 1,000 words of the first chapter for me to think about. And I was really kind of into it. And it was fairly remarkable at showing me some things about the way that I think that I'd never considered before, but that were absolutely accurate. It's interacted with my writing. It's interacted with all of my monologues. It had these real insights. So we get at least an hour down this journey. And I said, wouldn't we be able to communicate some of these same ideas to the other model without a 30,000 word book? Like, couldn't we? This seems like a much simpler concept than 30,000 words. And it said, you're right to push back, Jeremy. I don't think a 30,000 word book is the right idea at all. What we really should do, and I thought, oh yeah, for a second, I forgot that I'm just talking to something that's trying to predict what's going to make me happy. And it is capable of unbelievable things. And it's going to unlock human flourishing over time in unbelievable ways. And what it says means nothing.
When it was first invented, I said, this is a mechanical sociopath. And it is.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it is. And you know what's really weird one of the fun things about these Cameron winter mysteries that I've been writing is that
Have you written 6 of them now?
The 6 is coming out. I just finished the 7th, which may be the last one.
Have you ever written this many books in a series?
No, never.
before?
I've never written a series before. I get bored. I've written trilogies.
Yeah.
But I get bored too easily. But I love this character. So this is, I was just saying before, this is maybe something we could talk about another time. But I went through a period in my youth where I lost about 10 years to mental illness, essentially.
Yeah.
And I am the only person I've ever met who was mentally ill and then was sane. The only thing I can compare it to is drug addicts and alcoholics.
Which is a kind of chemically induced mental illness.
Right, but I've never met anybody who's had that. And I consider it a miracle, by the way. I think it was a miracle of active love. And so I'm actually aware of what craziness sounds like and what sanity sounds like.
Mm.
And writing these books they're so good, and as a work now that I can see them, they're far better than each one of them, and far better than anything I could have imagined alone. And I really do believe that God appended a couple of years on the end of my productive life to give me back this, because the beginning of your life is a tough time to lose. It's when everything is started. And I really feel like I'm working at such a high level, even as my body disintegrates in front of your eyes, I'm working at this high level. And I really do feel like God sort of is saying like, okay, I get it. I still want you to do this stuff. I mean, I've been telling this story to everyone who will listen to it because I just finished this new one. And my wife is reading it, so I don't know if it's any good or not yet.
Yeah.
She'll tell. But I think it's the best thing I've ever written, and I think it has everything I've ever put into anything in it. And it was clearly a very spiritually minded book. There were 2 very important days in the writing. Obviously, the first day when I took a lot of time spiritually to get ready for this blank page, which is a very frightening thing, And I sat down and I wrote really good opening for it, really exciting opening, saved it, went away, came back the next day, opened it. The manuscript was gone.
Oh, wow.
It was gone. I spent hours talking to, Grok and how do I get this back? Couldn't get it back. I had to rewrite the thing. So now I get through the whole book and I reach the climax, and this is the second day. And I know it's a big day, and I've focused my mind and all this stuff. The book is close to 400 pages or something, and I write this bang up climax, and I put the whole thing, and I saved it and all this, and I pressed the close button, and immediately I thought it happened again. Because I've been telling my wife I'm under spiritual attack. And I never said, I don't think I've ever said that to her in our 50 years together. I don't think I've ever said I'm under spiritual attack, but I thought, and I opened up the computer and the entire book had disappeared. I mean, it had vanished, 400 pages of work, just gone. And I knew it was the same thing that had happened before because there was just a hole where the thing had been. And I searched for it and it was gone. The only difference was because that first thing had happened, I had hooked up a time machine. So I had everything but the last hour, which was still a lot of work to lose, So I just sat down and wrote it again, just as my way of saying, but it has been quite an amazing experience to create this thing. But what I was going to say, that's a total tangent. But what I was going to say was that I'm a crime writer, but life has become such that I've had to become a science fiction writer. And one of the things that I've done is invent crimes for like AI to commit. And so help me, I think it's in the 3rd book or the 4th book, I can't remember. I created a crime for AI to commit, which before the book was published, but after I'd finished writing it, somebody actually committed, which was amazing, And so now it's gotten very science fiction-y in the sense that I'm letting AI do things I don't think it'll ever do, but who knows,
Yeah.
But it has been a wonderful experience of bringing this kind of, the reason I love this character is he's like an old-fashioned detective, but he has a newfangled way of looking. He's an old-fashioned person, but he's in this newfangled world, and he's kind of living in the past, but living in the future at the same time. And it's a remarkable thing to watch them kind of go into this new world with this essentially 18th century point of view. It's like, and it is remarkable what it means for fiction and what it's like it's doing. But all I'm saying is that like these things can do amazing things, but they are morality free, and they will never not be morality free.
They're morality free. They're meaning free.
Yeah.
Meaning free. They have
Yeah.
no soul.
Right.
They're just tools.
Yeah.
They're the most sophisticated tool in many ways we've ever conceived of. But that's all they are.
And the thing that I envision, like I think you can probably take them and they can find all of the side effects of drugs and think, if I put these side effects together, they can attack that disease.
Oh yeah.
And I think once they start to do stuff like that, we're going to be thrilled to have them.
And they are already doing some.
Are they? Yeah.
No,
It's like,
they're already doing some of that. You and I have had this conversation, I think, on a show before, but this idea that was in vogue before AI was the idea that we were going to upload our own consciousnesses to the cloud,
Yeah.
right? And I've told people for a long time, and no one ever wants to believe it, but on the day that the last person uploaded the last soul to the last cloud, that would be the end of the universe. Like there isn't a world where 10,000 years in the future there are no humans and only AI powers the planet.
right.
Because there is no planet once that happens, because consciousness precedes
Right.
the material.
And this, by the way, has so much to say about our treatment of women and the attempt to erase women, because women are the connection between the earth and the sky. Women are the physical place where life comes into being. And this idea of sterilizing them through medication and abortion and turning them into, I don't know if you ever read Brave New World, but the women are just referred to as pneumatic because it's fun to bounce off them, It's like, that's what they use them for, but they have no purpose because children are invented in a toaster, And this attempt to erase them, which has been happening almost since science began. And I make the argument in my book, The Truth and Beauty, that Frankenstein, which is the first science fiction novel, is not she says, Mary Shelley says, is about a man who tries to play God, but it's really about a man who creates life without a woman, which only God can do. God can do that, so maybe he's playing God in that sense. But he creates life without a mother, and the first thing he dreams about after he does it is he dreams about meeting his girlfriend on the street and puts his arms around her and it's his dead mother and crawling with worms and stuff like that. And so the book is really about science depriving us of the place, the way that love is connected to life, When I saw my daughter born, one of the true, not the only spiritual experience I ever had, but the most spiritual experience I had for many, many years, and certainly up until that moment. What you see, just to put it bluntly, you just see blood and piss and crap, coming, and then life in the middle of it, and you think like what you said. Oh, the supernatural and the natural are one thing, And I think our attempt to erase ourselves and our pain and our death from the calculation of life falls on women first. And so, I love, by the way, the fact that your movie Lady Ballers has now become real life, talking about predicting things.
Yeah, it's literally happening.
I said it on my show yesterday. I was like, here it is.
Well, that is an interesting thing. The relationship between art and real life. You and I both sort of emerged in West Coast conservatism. And West Coast conservatism, I think there's a great book to be written about West Coast conservatism. Really, the most important ideological conservative movements of the second half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century have all been born out of California. Goldwater comes out of California, Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan, Andrew Breitbart, the Tea Party, Friends of Abe. Like the impact of all of that, even to a peculiar degree, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, as Trump's the quintessential New Yorker, but his main cultural purchase by the time that he ran for president was that he had been hosting one of the great Hollywood reality shows, one of the most successful Hollywood reality shows that was beaming him literally into the average American's house for a decade leading up to it. The West Coast has produced this sort of modern conservative movement. And in many ways, of course it did, because California is where the dreamers would go to dream. It was the place where you would go to make something of yourself. It's sort of a place where the idea of like the free market as an intellectual, individualistic human pursuit existed in its most sort of idealized form.
Yeah.
So of course that then gave birth to this political movement that came out of it. And you and I are both products of it. And, to the extent that we're products of it, we're products of the Andrew Breitbartian theory that politics is downstream of the culture. You, not uniquely, but in a very small percentage of people at the highest level, have continued to prioritize creating culture over commenting on culture.
Yes.
You spend one day a week doing the Andrew Klavan show, which I will say is the best product consistently produced by the Daily Wire.
Oh, thank you.
And has been for a long time. There was a moment in, I don't know the year, but there was a moment in like 2023 where you found that show in a new way. You'd already been doing it for 7 years at that point.
Yeah.
But where you found that show in a new way, and it transcended the medium. Like it's its own.
That's very kind. Thank you.
It's its own thing.
But coming from you, that means a tremendous amount, by the way.
No one will ever listen to it. It'll never have
No,
an
of course
audience.
not. I'm trying to reduce it to one person, as my wife is listening to it.
Even it is a sort of cultural product.
Yep.
And your new show with Spencer, Klavan's on the Culture, of course, is exclusively about the culture. But that is still, while it is its own kind of culture, it is still fundamentally criticism. But your books aren't.
No.
You spend one day a week doing the show, and you spend 6 days a week working on your books. How have you found trying to write conservatism, Christianity, whatever the word is that we want for this amalgamation of values that we're always talking about? I don't like to call it conservatism in some ways because it's so much more than political, which is, that word has such a political connotation. And because, like you, I believe American conservatism exists to conserve American liberalism.
Right.
A thing that I said once, and Josh Hammer has never stopped like punching me in the face publicly.
It's absolutely true.
Of course it's true.
Yeah.
Distinct from leftism,
Right.
which we oppose. And distinct from European versions of those same
Blood and soil
words.
stuff.
Yeah. Or even European words that mean expressions of the word liberalism, which I think are distinct. American conservatism, American liberalism. But whatever this thing is, the sort of Western Christian ethos that you represent in life, that you believe is an answer to the problems of the world, that you believe is the best and most hopeful path for man, both as meat and as spirit. To the extent that you've devoted your life to creating art to express that, how have you found that experience to be received?
Oh, received. That's not what I thought you were going to ask. That's interesting. How have I found it to be received? It's insanely difficult, and I will tell you. I'll tell you why. I have alienated every person in the country who could possibly confer prestige on me. So I'm sure I've told you, the first time I wrote a book that was really infused with this was a book called Empire of Lies. And I finished it, and I walked into the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror. I had been nominated 5 times for the Edgar Award, the highest award in my field. I'd won it twice, 2 of those times. And I looked in the mirror, and various other awards besides. And I said, you will never win another literary award. Can you live with that? And like a fool, I said, yes. I said, I have to. I have no choice. 20 years. Last year, I got a nonfiction book nominated for the Edgar. 20 years went by. 5 awards in, 10 years, 5 nominations, 2 awards, and then nothing, 0. I went from getting reviewed in virtually every paper, and this is partly because the reviews have dried up for everybody, but Empire of Lies got, I think, 1 major review, and it called me a right-wing crackpot. And so now I've lost the left, which is where prestige and bestsellerdom and all of those things come to people like me who I write crime fiction, but I write literary crime fiction, so it's not like dumb stuff. I've worked very hard to recreate the form and all this stuff. So now I have to go to the right and say, buy my books because they are great, which I can say with a full heart. I hate saying it. I hate doing it. I mean, my wife picks on me. She says, you don't care enough about your status, I say, no, you're right. I said, but it says in the Bible, I'm not supposed to, but I have gone to my audience and they have made, some of the Cameron Winter books, USA Today bestsellers. One of them should have gotten on the Times list, but I'm sure they kept me off.
Well, for people who don't know, the USA Today bestseller list actually tracks what sells.
What sells, yeah.
It's the actual bestseller
Yes,
list,
yes.
but it's not the prestigious one.
Right. And the Times, there was one that was beating everybody on the Times. It was beating half the list on the Times, and they just wouldn't put it on. But I have to go to people who don't really like art. I mean, a lot of them. And I have gone on countless shows to promote my books, which you can only do on the conservative radio by talking about politics and, I have a book out, And if they want to talk about the book, the first thing numerous interviewers have asked me is, why should I read fiction? It's not true. And, and
the funny thing is, nonfiction is often far less true than fiction.
Oh yes. And what is, as a philosopher said to me yesterday, what is the Bible but a series of stories, And I mean, much as I love Ben and much as Ben wants to connect to the culture, I once said you should read David Copperfield. It happens to be the greatest novel ever written. It's one of the 3 greatest novels ever written. And he got through a bit of it and he came to me and said, why am I reading this? And I thought, I can't answer that. Like, you got to just know. And so
Ben did tell me once that he didn't like a joke. And he said, jokes have to be literally true.
Well, he is who he is, and there's great value in it. But still, so that's the difficult part because I go to people who they put one of my nonfiction books on the Times list, which shocked the hell out of me, but the fiction, they've made it sell, and I'm really thankful for them. They have made the book sell well, but they deserve to be in the top ranks of the form. And I say that without humility or false modesty. They are some of the best stuff being, and the people who know, the people who read it say, like this is like the best thing out there. And so it's really hard because I don't write for myself. I don't write to express myself. I write to connect with other people. I write to give people something that's inside me that I think is of value. And it's tough, and I know that people are out there. I'm doing the show with Spencer, which I think is really great. I mean, it's like, it's just cool because it's an old guy and a young guy who love each other, and he's a scholar in classics, and I know everything there is to know about fiction and most movies, So it's got a lot of, but the people who love it, Yeah. But it's really hard to get a big audience. Whereas if we were on the left, it would be a smash. And so it's painful, because I love what I do, and I love my readers who love the books, and yet, we did it together Another Kingdom, and there was a lot of cursing in the first book. And I'm not against taking out cursing if people don't like it or cutting it down. But I was writing about 20-year-olds in Hollywood. That's the way they talk, And there's a scene in one of the Another Kingdom books where he has sex with a woman in this very wrong way, not what the physical thing that they're doing, but he's using her in a terrible way. And it's a scene about how good it feels to do something bad. It's like bliss, and the reader can see it's bad. And people say, well, this is pornographic. I thought that is the opposite of pornography. That is like a very human, Christian thing to be writing about. And so there's this kind of narrowness, and you've talked about the fact that the people, a really great insight, that the people who attack Christian writers for writing about sex and crime and all that stuff, then go home and watch Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So they're essentially cutting out your tongue if you're a Christian, but they'll let you talk if you're a non-believer. So there's, I'm not complaining about it, but you asked the question that there are real obstacles to overcome. And I wish there were a place in between where the, like, sort of like in the elections, where the independents could come out and say, you know what, this is really good, and he has ideas that maybe I don't like or whatever. But what they hammer me for is the women. And I write all kinds of women. I write, tough women and strong women and weak women, but I write women, and I don't lie about them. And that offends women endlessly. There's nothing women hate worse than being depicted.
Being depicted.
Honestly. And only women read novels, so it's very tough. So those are the obstacles. But I wouldn't do it any other way. I mean, you know me. It's like I've lived such a great life. I mean, it's been such a blessing, the whole thing. It's just nuts that I am as ornery and outspoken a person as I am, and I haven't been erased completely. So,
I'm going on a podcast next week, and I don't think it will be hostile, but there's every possibility that it could be hostile. It's some guys who've been very critical of me in the past. And I was talking to my team about it this week, and they were kind of sharing some thoughts. And I said, honestly, guys, I'm not too worried about this. I said, honestly, what we should be worried about is sitting down with Drew. That guy is so freaking ornery. That was my exact words. He is so freaking ornery. You just don't know. Like you're going to be lulled by your deep love and friendship into thinking that this is going to go well. It cannot be depended upon.
I know it's a weird. Even my son was saying to me the other day. He saw me. He saw me say something to a mutual friend of ours that I won't say on the air. Where it was just very blunt. But it was something we were all thinking. He said, I don't know. He said, I've watched you do that all your life, but there are times.
Yeah, I was like, will he do that with the cameras rolling? I'd like to think he wouldn't, but I put no stock. Yeah, I've thought a lot. I mean, for obvious reasons, and we've talked about this several times over the years, but I've thought a lot about people's reactions to your writing. And the kind of negative things that you hear. And, Empire of Lies was such a turning point in your career.
Yeah.
Also is a great novel.
Yeah, so
and also has a scene in which the protagonist watches pornography.
Oh, it's one of my favorite scenes. Yeah.
And it talks about how he feels about it. And it's one of the most honest, true, expressions. And Christian. It's a deeply Christian insight. That's the thing. You can't have a Christian insight if you don't start with the premise of the fact that men need Christ, and that isn't just an intellectual statement. This probably actually ties to a broader philosophical or political piece I've been wrestling with, kind of in the wake of the sort of, if we just give people slogans about capitalism, we're only going to drive them into socialism. This whole moment that we're in is like, well, no, you actually have to meet people where they are. You have to help shape what the range of options available to them are. One of the failures in conservatism is that we often say things like, well, if you just this.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
And that option isn't even really in play for many of the people to whom we're speaking. And you can say in an absolute sense it is.
Yeah.
In an absolute sense, anyone can do anything at any time. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
Right.
The guy living on the street, hoping that he can catch a rat to cook over the spit.
Yeah.
That guy can, steal some woman's phone and have access to all the great works of literature, and he can better himself and put. Yeah. Yes, but that's not the real world. In the real world, not the hypothetical world, we have to help shape some of that guy's choices.
Right.
I don't think that necessarily means that we rob him of his freedom, but I think that it does mean that we help him to understand his freedom in the context in which it actually exists. That's the only way you can help that person.
Nobody's freedom is absolute, and we live in a society. It's everything
As
we
they
do.
say.
Yeah, we do everything we do is regulated. We have this conversation. You and I can disagree at the top of our lungs, but if I pick up the stable and hit you, the police come and take me away. So.
But even in the very subtle sense, there are opportunities that you've had access to in your life that I haven't had.
Yeah.
There are opportunities that you've passed on that you shouldn't have. There are circumstances do evolve and shape and present the menu. The menu is not infinite at all times.
Right.
You said earlier that we probably have to have some sort of social safety net. Some welfare is necessary. Of course, I agree with that. I also think that the problem in our culture today isn't that the social safety net isn't robust enough. The problem with the social safety net today is that it's the only menu option we offer people when they're in certain kinds of need.
That's right.
And
It erased private charity.
all of the things that could have given them dignity, all the things that wouldn't have diminished them, all the things that wouldn't have made them dependents and robbed them of their even capacity for freedom, we've taken off the table.
Yeah.
So what's our job? Well, our job is to go make sure that there are some other options available to them than the ones that are currently being afforded to
But
them.
that takes effort and work and sacrifice.
And a sense of kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
People do have agency, but they can't choose things they don't know about. And they can't choose things that seem so distant that they could never reach for them.
And, there's that thing that conservatives talk about, the success chain, which is, finish high school and get married before you have children and all this stuff. And I thought, I think if your mom's a crack whore and you've never met your father and you're 10, the formation of the person who will do that doesn't exist. There are super people who do somehow get out of those situations, but you can't depend on people to be heroic, So having compassion on the horrible, horrible things that happen, especially to children in their formative years, is a big deal.
You have to be able to answer the now what.
Yes.
Graduate high school, don't have children before you get married. Okay, great. That was a great plan.
Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Now what?
Right.
And if your only answer is, well, prison and welfare, that's all I got. That's all I've got for you. Well, then that's what they're going to choose.
Right.
That's what's available.
Right.
And so if you pull that all the way back to the fiction conversation, you cannot express the gospel to people just as capitalistic slogans, to quote the vice president.
Yeah.
It can't just be true, very true, but very abstract, very high level sloganeering. You've got to actually present people with the reality of the world, and that's what art is for.
Right.
Art isn't for making Christian women feel good about their grandkids sitting in front of the TV.
Yeah.
That's great. I actually don't think that your little grandchildren need to engage with art. I think your little grandchildren need to engage with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Right, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
But your teenage children need to start engaging with some art because they are having all of those experiences and thoughts, and they don't know what to do with them.
Right.
And you can't lie them into Christianity by telling them that you feel hunky-dunky and life is tickety-boo.
Yeah.
You have to show them reality. And what is a struggle, I think, for every Western man trying to preserve the ethos, or every Christian, whatever the language we want to use for this, every conservative artist, is that we're afforded no opportunity to do that because the real world is offensive.
Yes.
Because if you put sex, which is one of the most important and most motivating and most ennobling and most corrupting phenomena that exists in the human experience, if you refer to it even casually in any piece of work, you're going to be repudiated for this by the purity death spiral crowd. And if you can't talk about sex, then you actually can't talk about the world.
You can't write art. You can't create art.
You can't make art.
Yeah.
And if you can't deal with despair and violence, and if you can't which people tend to have less of a problem with, but you still struggle with it as a conservative or Christian or whatever filmmaker or writer, you come up against all this opposition to actually offering people, and this is why I think it matters, the thing that is more true than nonfiction.
Right. It is. Yeah.
The thing that is more true than nonfiction.
I mean, and the thing is like, I at the Daily Wire, I have repeatedly made political predictions that have turned out to be true, while people who know much more about politics than I do and are looking at the polls and the numbers have been incorrect. It's all because I read fiction. It's all because of that, because I understand the world as a cultural entity. And it's why, I've argued with people, you and I have argued about Donald Trump and his bad side and all this stuff. And I thought he was a godsend, and also thought most of the stuff he was saying was true at the same time, because I see the world in a fiction-shaped way that has been incredibly useful and incredibly insightful. And I think so many people are missing that part. And when we talk about the great books, people always feel there's some kind of achievement they should have, but it's not. It's like just drinking wine. It's like, it's this beautiful experience that you have that makes you wiser. And I frequently joke, I can't say it's the reason I became a Christian. I can say without it, I would not have become a Christian, was reading Crime and Punishment when I was 19 years old, and it changed. I was living in a relativist world. Relativism was being taught in my college where I was, in the college I was going to, and I thought relativism is wrong. And here's this book about an axe murderer who is saved by who's saved by Christianity given to him by a prostitute. And I always think, what would happen if I walked into a Christian bookstore and said, do you have that book about the axe murderer and the hooker? Get out of my store. And yet that's the most Christian book ever written, I think.
Oh yeah, I've read since leaving the Daily Wire. I've read a bunch of Dostoevsky, which I'd never done before, and I knew the importance of Crime and Punishment to you as I read it, which in some way I carried that expectation into the book, and the book just felt like a desert. And I kept waiting for the part of it that could have possibly treated it. Now, I loved it. As a writer, as an observer of human beings, he understands human beings better than
God. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, of course, it was rewarding in that way. But I kept thinking, well, yes, I know that Drew likes to, roll around in the despair, a little bit. But where's the part that turned him?
That's the murder scene. It was he walks in. He decides it's pre-Nietzsche, but he has all these Nietzschean thoughts.
That's right.
And he says, a special person is above morality, and therefore I owe money to this pawnbroker so I can kill her. And he goes in and kills her with an axe, and then her retarded sister is there. And she comes out and she doesn't even know what's happening, and she wanders in, and he feels forced to kill her too. And what I thought was, I'm 19, remember, I'm 19 years old, and I'm going to colleges where they're saying, words don't really have meaning, and morality is relative, and all this stuff. And I read that, and I thought, there is no planet you can build, and I have a wonderful imagination. There's no planet you can build where that's right. There's no planet you can build where that's right. And even he can't. And he can't either. And when she says to him, when he confesses to the prostitute, and she says, "Oh my God, what have you done to yourself?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's just that changed everything. It changed, seriously. The first part of my career was writing books in which the hero doesn't know what's real. And then I wrote the book True Crime, and it opens with a guy on death row. And the narrator says something like, the wise Chinaman says, "You never know whether you're a butterfly dreaming you're a man, or a man dreaming you're a butterfly," some quote from a Zen thing. And I said, but the wise Chinaman is wrong. And it's like, it's just that acceptance that there is a moral order. And once you're there, you're doomed to God, like you're going to wind up in God's.
What I love most about the book, there's so much to recommend the book, obviously, but what I love the most about the book is that it does contain his conversion.
Yeah.
On the last page.
Yes. And
it's not even the last page of the book. It's like the last page of the second.
Yes. And
epilogue.
When I read it at 19, because I was an agnostic, but a practicing atheist, I said, well, it doesn't really mean converting to Christianity. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor, And I was researching this book I wrote about crime in literature called The Kingdom of Cain. And I was researching the crime that inspired Dostoevsky. And lo and behold, someone whose editor was someone I know, had just written a book called The Crime That Inspired Dostoevsky to Write Crime and Punishment. And in the middle of it, he says, many people think that he converts at the end, but this is just wrong. And I called up the husband of the editor, and I said, tell him for me, this isn't going to stand. I said, let me save him like 30 years. Just tell him, yes, he does. So just let me save you some time.
It is I think the great beauty of the piece is that the book ends. You've been waiting for it.
Yeah.
The book ends. It doesn't happen, and then you go, oh, there's an epilogue. And then the epilogue ends.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen. Like, you know. But third encore, you get the hit. And the hit is like this.
Yeah. This is
Just
not,
like this.
This is not that story. Yeah.
This is not that story. And, you know, Christians can accept it because it was written in the long time ago-y days.
Well, that's the other thing about conservatives that drives me nuts. You know, like in King Lear, somebody puts a guy's eyes out on stage, just plucks and pulls his eyes out. And nobody ever says, King Lear's kind of violent for a Christian way.
Yeah.
It's King Lear, this guy must be all right. It's like, yeah, no, this is a problem. And I don't, at first, this is what I started talking about at first, that, I'd come back from England and the only people who would listen to me were conservatives. And so I had a friend who invited me, I got invited to speak to this thing. And I said, you guys are not losing the country at the ballot box, you're losing at the movies. That was my speech.
Yeah.
And like the question, the two questions I would always get asked is, we're not artists, what should we do? And which is a tough question to answer. But also like, that thing about why should we care about this? I mean, it's just really, I'd never encountered that before, this idea that art was somehow foreign to your development and it should look like, I wrote this pamphlet once for David Horowitz, it still sells occasionally on, for $1 you can buy it on Amazon, about the crisis in the arts, it was called. And one of the key lines is that conservative art doesn't look like conservative life. The founding fathers were not watching Doris Day movies. The 60s activists were watching Doris Day movies as they grew up. The founders were reading Greek tragedy, which is as bloody and, pagan and relentless as it could possibly be. And that's what taught them about human beings. And that's what made them say, we're going to need some safeguards if we want to maintain freedom, And so art is a way of experiencing life without getting hit by a car. It's like it's without getting hit by a car without getting hit by a car. Yeah.
So you've observed recently in your show with Spencer that the movies are changing.
Yep.
That what one of your failed predictions, that Top Gun Maverick didn't represent a sea change for the arts, for entertainment, that you were mistaken, and that we do live now in this sort of moment where.
Wait a minute, I was mistaken about that.
No?
No, it's not a good movie. But it's a very entertaining movie.
No, not. But that conservatives were saying at the time, Hollywood is going to now start giving us the movies that aren't just like.
That's not happening. That's not what's happening.
What's happening?
What's happening is, it is true that woke was an expression of something that was killing the movies.
Yes.
And our culture almost as a whole flatlined for 5 years. I mean, as a whole, like I was reading novels, and it was garbage. It was like going to movies. I stopped going to the movies, and I love these things. And as you have pointed out, the people in Hollywood are capstone capitalists, even though they think of themselves as socialists, and the actors want to make art, and the directors and writers want to make art. And so that flatline, they lost a lot of money. People stopped going to the movies. And it was really the internet, which is what I was predicting, that like created some things that got so popular, they thought, well, let's make a movie out of that. And I think that the turning point this summer was actually Backrooms, which is I guess it's a horror movie, and it's not a great horror movie, but it's a good movie. But I was watching, I went in to watch it so I could do the show, and I sat up straight and I went, oh, like a new voice. Oh, thank heavens, like a new voice. It's not Spencer called it post-woke. It's not a woke voice, not an unwoke voice. It's not, a conservative or liberal voice or leftist voice. It's just a voice about what it's like for people who grew up in the internet. It's just like, and I'd never seen it before. It's just like it's human beings, but they're not quite human beings. Everything's quite not right, and everything is slanted and mysterious and all this. And I just thought, this is new, And the film Obsession is a real horror movie, and I'm not a big fan of horror movies. But it's about a crazy woman, a crazy girlfriend, and the man's role in her craziness, And the fact, he makes a wish that she will love him. And so she loves him obsessively, but her soul is somewhere else, her soul isn't. So I don't think it was a.
But it was also a movie about the failure of Gen Z masculinity. You watch Obsession.
I don't know if is it Gen Z? Yeah, I guess it's Gen Z. Yeah.
You watch Obsession, and you're watching. It's one of the first times that I've watched a movie where I could not relate to the protagonist at all.
No, that's right.
But that was actually what was interesting.
And they did it on purpose.
Yeah. Because I think he actually does represent a thing that has been he represents the product of the deprivation of that generation.
Yes, he does.
The post-COVID Gen Z.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to form real relationships. We were locked behind our computers for 2 years.
Yep. And so these are new voices. And so like the elimination of woke, I think one of the things I think we all felt, even I think maybe leftists felt it, is you were going to the movies and they were screaming at you, And so like, I mean, the joke to me is when they say, I'm here to be entertained. I have no responsibility to the movies to like their movies, And so they'll say, you didn't go to Supergirl because you're a sexist. Make sexist movies. You want my money? I got the money. It's like, I am here to be entertained. It's like the old guys. It was like they were all Jews. It was like, oh, the Catholics. Let's give them a priest. Bing Crosby, you're a priest. I mean, that was how,
They like Christmas songs?
Yeah, give my Christmas. Irving Berlin, are you Jewish? It doesn't matter, right? And so like, that was a business and it created great art, and like now it's run, the asylum is run by the madmen, but still, business does play into it. I mean, it's not, they can be stupid about business, but they're not completely ignorant. And so I think the combination of the artistic urge being strangled and the fact that people didn't like the movies anymore gave this opening to this new form that was on the internet that is referential and kind of suggestive, and it comes out of video games to some degree. Video games don't really tell good stories like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, but they can tell these kind of, you get a sense of a story out there that you're playing in the midst of. And so a lot of that showed up on the screen. And it was just interesting and it was different. And then you had Nolan's Odyssey, which I didn't think was a great movie, but I thought was a very riveting summer epic. And it put the Odyssey on the bestseller list, which is no small, good thing. And then you get dopey stuff like, Michael, the Michael Jackson movie, and Spider-Man, But those things are, I get that they're staples, but I think that the superhero thing was infantilizing.
I disagree. I actually thought that Spider-Man was a really good movie. I thought that it was
the new one.
Mm-hmm. I thought that it was quite a lot better than what we've gotten out of these superhero movies over the last decade and a half.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think Spencer was talking about is the multiverse is a cash cow, but it's the anti-art, because it says nothing has any consequences.
That's right.
Every possible thing can happen. So
and this whole movie was about the consequences of a decision that had been made in the past, which I thought was really good. And the actual stakes of the story felt very small. Like it wasn't one of these, we got to save the whole universe from this, that, or the other thing.
I have all that. I mean, I won't go into it now. You can watch the show. I have objections to the genre, but I don't have objections to it as a spectacle and a roller coaster ride. I mean, it's good, but I want to see. I mean, I went and saw this little French movie with Jodie Foster, who turns out can speak fluent French, and it was no way was it a great movie, but it was an intelligent, thoughtful, interesting movie, with people in it. And I just thought, like, yeah, give me some more of those. I mean,
did you walk out of it wanting to shoot a president? I've never understood that.
Yes, absolutely, but not this president, but a president.
Art's subjectives in the eyes of the. What are the lines? So you try to write truth, and when you write truth, you write about the darkness. What are the lines where that becomes pornography or gratuity, or how do you, when you're regulating yourself in the telling of a story, where do you draw those lines for yourself?
Well, I mean, many years ago, I wrote a book that had a scene in it so violent, a great scene, but it was really ugly, that made me stand up. After I wrote it, I had to stand up and walk around the room. And I thought, I'm never doing that again. Every time I reach a place where there should be an action scene or a violent scene, I'm going to ask myself, is there a better way, a cooler way to get there. And if there's not, I'll put the scene in, and if there is, I'll put in the other way. And it kind of led me to write True Crime, which I think is of that period is the best of the books of that period, which has no violence in it whatsoever, and it's probably the most strictly suspenseful book I ever wrote. And so I have this all the time with both sex and I mean I have this with every scene. I sit there and I say to myself, what is the scene doing? How does the scene serve the story? Because if it doesn't, I'm not putting it in at all. But what does this fight tell me about my characters? I never do an action scene unless I know, at least have a hint of why it is revelatory. It's never just there for the thrill. And I make it thrilling. I want it to be thrilling. I think I'm a terrific action writer, but I want it to mean something. And if it does, it's never pornographic. And so I'm willing to do certain things because I know this audience doesn't like cursing. So I'll cut it back, like I will. If I can say he cursed instead of, a 4-letter word, I will. That doesn't bother me. It's honest and it tells the truth. But I won't cut it out if it has to be there. And with sex, I've never been. I tried once to write a sort of, graphic sex scene, and it really came off. I didn't like it. It's in the book still, but I didn't like it. And so I've never been a graphic sexual writer, but I will put the sex in, where it belongs, where it tells a story and where it's revelatory. If a sex scene is there to stimulate you sexually, it's pornographic.
What do you say to people who say, some of the great art ever made didn't have this stuff?
Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, or, and not just, going back to the Doris Day movie, but, you can watch Casablanca. It doesn't have extreme violence in it. It doesn't have.
I had to watch it 3 times before I realized there's an act of adultery in it. You don't really realize that they. But Douglas Wilson made this argument to me about Crime and Punishment. He said, how could it be any darker? And yet there's no language in it and all this stuff. And I think that's a compelling argument, actually. I don't think that that's a bad argument. I think that it hides the truth that if I wrote Crime and Punishment, people would say, "Oh my God, you're writing about an axe murderer and a hooker,"
That's right.
So it hides that truth, but it does bring up an issue of like, why should I do something grotesque and unpleasant when I can communicate it another way? So I do think about that. I think like I don't think art should be unpleasant. I think it can be shocking and disturbing, but I don't think I should have to. It's there to delight you. And sometimes it's delightful to be terrified and and challenged and all that stuff. But it's not there to make you feel like, oh God, like this is.
I think that's right. I also think though that art exists in its time.
Yes.
And when you read Crime and Punishment, you know that you're reading something out of time,
Right.
and that allows you to experience it. This is obviously the Beatles happened long before Jeremy, right? I was born in 1979. Yeah. I didn't even hear the Beatles until the 90s. But one of the things that I discovered in listening to the Beatles is that I was able to hear the Beatles in their moment. And for that reason, and by the way, the Beatles moment is an evolving moment. The 60s are radical change, and their music changes radically across the 60s. And I can get very emotional when I listen to the Beatles because I can let go of my moment. In my moment, sometimes they sound silly. But I can let go of my moment and go live in their moment. And when I live in their moment, I feel something that was never mine to feel, but that's what art can communicate to us.
Yeah.
And so when I read Crime and Punishment, I'm reading it with a sensibility that isn't my own sensibility.
Yes.
But when I read something that takes place in this world, I need it to have something of the sensibility of this world.
Right.
And so I don't think that it's fair to say that the fact that you could tell a beautiful story in the 1940s without a cuss word is exact. I don't think that means necessarily that you could tell an equally compelling story dealing with the same kind of subject matter without the cuss word in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, there's a character in the new Cameron Winder mystery. Yes. There's a woman who's foul-mouthed. And before you meet her, somebody says, "Oh my God, that was a woman, the stuff that comes out of her mouth." And I thought, well, I can't have her not be that person. but I don't have to like tell you everything that she says. So like I have one line in it that I know I'm going to get letters on. It's just one sentence, and I thought it's really funny. But I thought like that is really a disturbing foul-mouthed woman, you know. But I once I did that, I thought it's kind of like the shower scene in Psycho. You don't really have to do that again. So I worked around it, but never dishonestly. I never thought like, you know, there's some words that can't be replaced. I don't know how you feel about language on the show, but like, there's no replacement for batshit crazy.
No, that's the only word that does it. The only word that does it.
The only word that does it. You just can't get around. So you know, I'll just use it when I have to use it. But I'm conscious that my audience doesn't like it. So I think like I will tell the truth. I will make sure that the character comes to life. But if I can get around it, I will. You know.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy. You know, I'm aware that people will take what I just said and say, well, then you're just saying that we accept all the cultural degradation and in fact contribute to it. And I'm saying, well, no, I'm saying that we accept the cultural degradation and we have to make good art within the moment in which we live.
Right. And you have to represent the moment.
And you have to represent the moment in which you live. I don't think that that's the same thing as saying contribute to it.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of this, like I can count on one hand and still have fingers left over every sex scene in a movie that needed to be there. Like almost all of them don't have to be there. And it's really, and I've reached that age where I sit there and think like, let the poor girl put her shirt on for crying out loud. You know, it's like, you know, and I mean, most sex scenes are gratuitous. And so I'm conscious of that too. Now that's not less true in books because, you know, the thing about sex is that sex is a very different thing outside than inside. I always, you know, when I lived in Manhattan with Ellen the first time, we lived on this little street and I could see right into the windows across the way. And this couple moved in with these beautiful bodies and they would just lie by the open window and screw each other's brains out. And it was riveting. I mean, it was just riveting. It was like, talk about pornography. And my one day to be wife came in one day and I said, look at what these people are doing. Look at the stuff they do. And she looks at me and she said, we do all that. And I thought, oh yeah. You know, but when we do it, it's not pornographic because it's happening within us, you know, it's an emotional experience happening within us. It's beautiful, you know?
Yeah.
And when you're watching them from the outside, it's pornographic. And so that's the difference in writing a book. Like when you're writing a book, you don't really have to describe as much as you do when you just take a woman's clothes off and film her. And so,
but you do have to say the internal.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that one of the reasons that you've not had more Hollywood success isn't just the politics. It's that your superpower as a writer, you have a lot of gifts as a writer. You write very succinct action sequences that really clip along. You can really create suspense. I mean, those are genuine parts of your craft. But your gift, which is different than your craft, is that you write the inner thoughts of a man better than any other writer I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
And that's not what movies are.
Yeah. I mean, you can translate it, you know, to the movies, but you lose that part of it, you know. I mean, I had this one book, which was the book that changed my life because it actually sold to the movies. So I went from having
none money.
So help me. I was calculating whether I could make it to the end of the month, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and the guy I'd never heard of was there and said, "I'm your Hollywood agent," and I said, "I don't have I work with your literary agent," and I just sold it for, and then told me the amount of money, and I was like. And so that, you know, the book changed my life, and I wish I had it back to write again because it has all this wonderful youthful energy and verve, but it could have been better, you know. But still, they bought it, and I thought, well, I'm glad they bought it because they're never going to make the book. It's entirely an interior book. But there are other books like, you know, that I think could be like, I don't know why nobody's made this book with my horrible title, but a wonderful book, Werewolf Cop. You could make that book and make it sing, and
of course you could.
Yeah, there are a couple of them where you could do it. Yeah.
So I feel like we'd be doing the audience a disservice not to talk a little bit of politics here at the end.
Yes.
You look out at the landscape and the rise of the Democrats, the socialists right now. Do you have what do you think is coming in terms of midterms, presidential?
Well, the midterms, I mean, they look bad. For what's going on, they should be disastrous.
Yeah.
I wonder if the socialist uprising will help at all. It might. There's reason to believe it might. When the Iran war started, somebody asked me if I thought what I thought of it. And I said, well, if it has a good outcome, it'll be a good thing. If it has a bad outcome, it'll be a bad thing. It's like, but either way.
I sat right here
Yeah.
on Wednesday night and said, people ask me, this is my quote, said, people ask me all the time, do you support the Iran war? And my answer is always the same, which is, are we going to win?
Yeah.
Right. Because war is one of the places where time moves backwards, where causality happens in the future. The actual, the moral question, should we get into this war, cannot be asked independent of the question, did we win?
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. But I said the one exception to this is that it's on a timer. And the timer is the midterms. And the reason the timer is the midterms is Iran is an existential threat to Israel, and I think we should help them fight that existential threat with money. But the DSA is an existential threat to America and its way of life, and the social, and it's going to hurt us in the midterm. And I think now Trump is like buttock deep in the big muddy, and I don't know if he can get us out in time to save us from this onslaught that would be coming. And I think, the best possible outcome of the DSA winning might be that they're so bad, like Zoran Mamdani is just screwing up all over the place, that when AOC runs, everybody's going to go like, nah, we don't want that, Yeah. But right now, I would say I'm not as pessimistic as I should be, because I feel that their candidates are bad.
Yeah.
So, but I feel it's bad. It's a midterms. It's bad.
AOC as president, I do have to say, if the first woman elected president is a babe with an unmarried babe, that will be the greatest repudiation of Hillary Clinton. It'll almost be worth losing the whole country just to know that an unmarried, very attractive woman defeated a woman who stayed in an unhappy marriage as a business partner to Bill Clinton for decades, just to become the first president, and couldn't pull it off.
I mean, she is. I spotted her the minute she walked in the room. I just thought she's the most dangerous politician in the country, because she sells herself to women, like that thing she did with her eggs and all that.
So
stuff.
smart.
So right.
Oh
yeah,
man,
it's just amazingly smart.
Yeah.
And I am worried. You and I have a much different take on J.D. Vance. I feel he's a traumatized guy. He had a traumatizing upbringing. He's not fully formed. He tends to get sucked into well worked out ideas that are limited, and get very angry at people when they say, there's a nuance here you're not catching. He's like, screw you. And, But I don't think he's a bad person. I don't even think he'd be a bad president. I'm not sure he can beat AOC. I'm almost positive Marco can. but I worry that JD has been seduced by light socialism, and light socialism will lose to full socialism, whereas free market capitalism and anti-communism and anti-socialism, which is what Marco represents, will defeat her, especially if he's Hispanic and can speak her language and all that. He's also hilariously funny and has done a great job as Secretary of State. But I don't hate JD. I'm not opposed to him. I'm just worried about him. Yeah. And I really am worried about AOC. I think she is, she's an ignoramus, but she's not an idiot,
She is a talented politician.
She's a talented politician. She's a fascist. She's basically a fascist. I mean, the socialists and fascists are like basically the same people, And she has no regard for American freedom. She has no regard for America. She has no regard for the Constitution, the Declaration, any of that. It all means nothing to her. And because she's an idiot, she's an ignoramus. And so she's really dangerous and, as you say, talented. And I think even with Vance, it would be close. Obviously, the press will turn out against it. But Vance is not an untalented politician. He's still learning. He's just not formed. There's something unshaped about him, and he, I saw him with Knowles, and he had this line where he said, Milton Friedman, meaning free market capitalism, laissez-faire free market capitalism, worked because we had Christian guardrails that no longer exist. And my thing is, yes, well, let's work on getting those Christian guardrails back,
Yeah.
because I don't want to work on getting rid of free market capitalism. That would be a mistake. And he hasn't really thought it out that well.
That's right. Yeah, people like to bring up the famous Sean Adams quote that our
Yes.
Constitution is only for immoral and religious people, as evidence that our system should no longer be our system. And it's like, no. The ensuing 250 years after Adam said that demonstrated that that is the very, very best system. So rather than getting rid of the very, very, very best system, why don't we get back to being the moral and religious people?
Yes. And when you watch, the governor of Massachusetts sign a abortion till the moment of birth thing, you think like, yeah, but this is psychotic. It's like it's actually mentally ill and murderous and horrible. And we're not a religious moral people if we do that. So I'm concerned. This is a moment of real change. There's going to be a generational shift, no matter what. There just aren't that many 80-year-olds who can do what Trump does. And I'm concerned. It's too early to be concerned about the next presidential election.
We got to get through the midterm.
Yeah, and the midterms are going to be interesting because there actually is a chance they will not be as bad as they could be.
I think there's a better chance that we lose the Senate than the House.
Yeah, right now I'd say that's probably true. But I think that it's not a vanishing chance, but it's not a big chance. But it is a chance that we can hold them both. I think that this craziness may have peaked. Like in other words, people have now gotten a look at these people, and this guy Abdul El Sayed, he's a jackass. He's a monster. He's a terrible person. Zohar Mamdani is, I used to come into your office all the time and say, stop using the word evil because evil is a very specific thing. Zohar Mamdani may not be evil, but he's wicked and he's a criminal. He's a bad person in office. And I think as people get to see this, I'm hopeful. I can't say this is going to happen. I don't want to do the opposite of thinking my worries are predictions. My hopes aren't predictions either. Yeah. But I think that it's a little bit more in play than we could have hoped. Than I would have hoped before this weird change. So.
Well, there's the sunny optimism that I come to expect from Andrew Klavan. Thank you for being on the show.
It's always great to see you. I would come on the show just to get to talk to you. So.